So while we're talking about praying and things that we want to do and walking in wisdom, now remember this. I don't exactly know the right precise way to pronounce it, the norovirus, or the some kind of virus that's over in China, because it is spreading and it does affect. Right now, the reports coming out of China is that it's got a 15% fatality rate. So if 100 people get it, 15 of them pass away. So this is a really good time to walk in wisdom. If your immunity's down, take probiotics, make sure you're getting plenty of rest, drink plenty of water, that kind of stuff. It's much better to always walk on the, especially it's wintertime too. So colds and stuff go around. So great time to walk in wisdom. So let me, I'm really excited to share on what I want to share on tonight, which is one of the world's simplest topics. It's about complaining. And one of the things that's really exciting to me is when you see a lesson that it's a plain lesson, a simple lesson, but but there's verses in the New Testament that talk about speech and about not complaining, and they're very straightforward and very simple. And then you look and you see something couched in it's the same lesson, but it's just couched it in a way and in a level for those of us. And I look at this group, and many of you, like me, have been studying the Word of God for decades. And so, we've read Philippians about don't murmur and stuff like that over and over and over again. But every once in a while, you see that lesson couched in a way that you've never seen it before. And that happened with myself this week while I was translating Joshua with Bill Schlegel. We just had a lot of fun. And so as we go there, so one of the lesson has to do with complaining and with how to deal with complainers. And we need to be aware of that because we've got a sin nature. So the sin nature, as it bubbles out of us, kind of the natural tendency is to gripe about things. I should put that in the first person. My natural tendency tends to be to gripe about things. So I have to really put the brakes on so I don't do that and fight that sin nature. And we try to do that. So I want to start by sharing my screen. So let me see how I'm going to do that. Share and boom. Okay, share down here. Okay, you guys at this point should be looking at a map of Israel. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good deal. Now this is the map as the tribes were divided by Joshua, which is what that's in the book of Joshua where we've been translating. And these tribal areas, that the boundaries that you see, this particular map comes from the NIV, back of the NIV Study Bible. Now, through history, the tribal boundaries kind of waffled a little bit, but as they were originally laid out by Joshua, they're fairly clear. And so you see Simeon down here, and he's in the middle of Judah, and Judah's quite large. And then if you notice here, you've got little Benjamin, and he's kind of pinkish. I wish the colors jumped out a little more so that and I'll look around in maps and atlases and see if I can find a better thing that pops out. But if you notice how tiny Benjamin is, and then here's little Dan, and even little Dan couldn't inherit all of their stuff, so they ended up going up here to Dan. And then above Dan we have Ephraim, and so we have Ephraim, and if you count these tribal areas, you have 12 tribal areas. And so the question would be, well, wait a minute, how can there be 12 tribal areas if there were 12 sons of Israel, 12 sons of Jacob, and then one of those sons was Levi, and Levi didn't get a tribal area? And so if Levi didn't get a tribal area, there should only be 11 tribal areas, but there are 12. And how does that happen? And the way it happens is, if you remember from the law of Moses, the oldest son got a double portion. Well, the oldest son was Reuben, but he was not the oldest son of Jacob's chosen wife, who was Rachel. And the oldest son of Rachel was Joseph. And so Joseph, it turned out, had two sons and two sons only. So each of those sons got their own tribal area. And that made Joseph into two tribes. Levi didn't get any land area, and that meant that there were 12 tribal areas. So what you have then is you have Simeon, and inside Judah, little Benjamin, Dan. Now you have Ephraim, which was the younger son of Joseph. And Manasseh is this great, huge, kind of reddish pink thing, but but wanting more than that, they also got this whole area over here in pink. So Manasseh, by far and away, has the largest tribal area in Israel. And if you combine all of Manasseh and all of Ephraim, they got this giant tribal area in which you could put Benjamin and Dan and Zebulun and Issachar and Naphtali and Reuben. And you could pile all of those into here, and they've got this gigantic tribal area. So based on that, you would think that Ephraim and Manasseh would be really happy. They would be really satisfied. They would be saying, wow, this is great. We are really the chosen ones of God, because all of these tribal areas were assigned by lot. You know, and it was very clear if you read the book of Joshua that Yahweh assigned the tribal areas. And so he assigned who got what and what their boundaries were. And so they could have very easily at this point said, wow, Ephraim, Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, the tribe of Joseph, is really blessed and God really likes them. And that's what we think should happen. But in fact, that is not what happened. So if we go to Joshua chapter 17, what we're going to find is that the Ephraimites and the Manassites were complainers. And so they come, this is verse 14 of, oh, I didn't stop sharing, did I? I need to stop sharing. I don't have to stop sharing, but I'd like to see y'all. There we go. So anyway, so here's the Ephraimites and Manassites, who are the tribe of Joseph. And in verse 14 of Joshua chapter 17, it says, the children of Joseph. So that is the people of the tribe of Ephraim and the people of the tribe of Manasseh. They spoke to Joshua saying, why have you given me just one lot, one part for an inheritance, since I'm a numerous people, because Yahweh has blessed me so far? Now, first of all, they're stretching the truth. I mean, they say they only got one lot. It is true that when God divided up the land area, he divided it up to Manasseh and Ephraim as one, but then he divided it specifically into two parts. So they're coming to Joshua and they're rather much complaining about something that they've sort of made up, because in fact, each of their tribal areas did get specific areas. And if you read Joshua chapter 16 and Joshua chapter 17, you can see those individual land areas for Ephraim and for Manasseh on both sides of the Jordan River, both east of the Jordan and Bashan, and in the middle of the territory, as we saw. And by the way, while I'm pointing that out, not only did Ephraim and Manasseh have by far and away more territory than anybody else. You look at the territory they got. If you're poor little Issachar, I'm going to share my screen again. If I can find my thing here. Let me go back to sharing my screen, and I'll go back to the map. Let's say you're up here and you're Asher or you're Naphtali, and you've got to go down to worship 3 times a year. You've got a good solid 3-day hike. If you're Ephraim, you can get there the same day you leave. If you leave at early in the morning, like 6 o'clock in the morning, you should be able to get to a site of worship easily that very day. And if you're Manasseh, you're controlling a lot of the Jezreel Valley and the Carmel, some of the richest, most fertile, and the plain of Sharon. This is some of the most fertile land in all of Israel and some of the wealthiest land. And if you remember, when it talks about the beauty of Israel, usually it'll talk about the beauty of Carmel. So that's in Manasseh. So not only did Manasseh and Ephraim get this huge land area, but the land area they got was fabulous. I mean, poor Naphtali up here, you know, up in the hill country of the Galilee, very, very rough and hilly and stuff like that. And so they had absolutely zero reason to complain. And yet they're going to come and they're going to complain to Joshua. So let's see, going back to, and wow, I did something wrong. Sorry, guys. My computer is being weird all of a sudden. Uh-oh, I don't even know what that means. Okay, there we go. So now I'm back in Joshua chapter 17. So here's starting over again at verse 14. The children of Joseph, that's Ephraim and Manasseh, spoke to Joshua saying, "Why have you given me just one lot and one part for an inheritance, since I am a numerous people? Because Yahweh has blessed me so far." In verse 15, and when you have someone that complains, and we're going to go at this from two angles. One is there are people that are complaining that shouldn't be complaining. And sometimes that's me. That might be you sometimes. We need to put the brakes on that, because that's not what God wants. You know, some of the prophecies, you know, James, your prophecy tonight, you know, I see you. You know, that God is watching us. And Rob, your prophecy tonight, you know, that we need to be bold to speak, and we need to be bold when it comes to each other and stuff. And then Thomas, your manifestation, you know, give light to the world. Well, we're not giving light to the world if we're complaining all the time. And so we need to kind of use our ears to find out if we're listening to what we're saying. And I love what Joshua does here, because there are times when somebody just needs to emote. Something terrible has happened and they just need to emote, or they are bringing up a legitimate concern. They're not just complaining to complain, but they're bringing up a legitimate concern that they want to have something done about. And then there are the other times where you're just dealing with a complainer. And you know, every Christian, as they interact with other Christians, kinds of takes on a pastoral leadership role where you've got to be willing to be iron sharpen iron. And so we've got to be discerning, what am I dealing with here? And when you're dealing with a complainer, watch what happens with Joshua here, because he doesn't give in. And so many times, if we have somebody that nags and complains and nags and complains, we think that if we give in, if we somehow ameliorate them in some way, that you know, they'll go away, things will be better. And of course, that never works. If somebody is actually a complainer, then they're going to keep complaining. And you might fix one situation, and guess what you're going to be running into the next day or the next week is they're going to be complaining again about another situation. And so you've got to be willing to take a stand. And we see that Joshua did that. So in verse 15, Joshua said to them, "If you are a numerous people, go up to the forest and clear land for yourself there in the land of the Perizzites and of the Rephaim, if the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you." Now, Joshua is not giving them any more land than they already had. He's simply pointing out, now wait a minute, let me get this straight. You guys want more land, but you are too lazy, unwilling, whatever it is, you're unwilling to clear the land that God gave you that has trees on it so you can live there, and you'd like God to give you somebody else's land, like whose? And so Joshua is really good here. He's like, if you're so numerous, then pick up axes and go clear some of the land. and I love that. Just bang. He just meets them right in the middle of their complaint. And he says, if the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you. Verse 16, the children of Joseph said, the hill country is not enough for us. All the Canaanites who dwell in the land of the valley have chariots of iron, both those who are in Bethshan and its daughter towns, and those who are in the valley of Jezreel. Like I said, the valley of Jezreel was part of that inheritance. And notice that when Joshua pointed out they should go to the forest and clear land, they didn't say that's a good idea. Instead, they shifted the argument. And this is something that complainers do. You come up with some way they can deal with their problem, and they just shift the problem a little bit. So it's like, well, the hill country isn't enough to us. And besides, in the valley, what about clearing the forest? But forget that. The valley, they have chariots of iron, both those who are in Bethshan and the daughter towns and those who are in the valley of Jezreel. Now, they probably did have chariots of iron, but God had promised Israel that they would be able to beat the Canaanites. And under Joshua's leadership, there was battle after battle after battle. Look at Jericho. In Jericho, the walls just fell down by a miracle. Then when Joshua went on a southern campaign to fight the Canaanites, some of whom dwelt in the valley, it says Yahweh threw hailstones down on the enemy, and more people died from the hailstones than from the sword of Joshua and his army. And so there was miracle after miracle, and God was going to be fulfilling his word. He said he would be with the Israelites. He said he would give them the land. Maybe they did have chariots of iron. So what? So did the Egyptians. What happened to their chariots? Well, the wheels fell off and they all drowned in the Red Sea. It's what happened to the chariots of iron that Sisera had, who was the general of Hazor in Judges 4 and 5. Well, it rained, his chariots got stuck in the mud, and the Israelite army wiped them out. So what's going on here is the children of Joseph they're just being complainers. They don't want to do the hard work, clear the land. They don't want to do the hard work of trusting God and actually entering into battle. They'd rather just gripe and see if Joshua would give them more land. And he's not going to do it. And so they said, the hill country is not enough for us. Verse 17, Joshua spoke to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and to Manasseh, saying, you are a numerous people and have great power, meaning you could win against the Canaanites if you'd bother to go fight them. You are a numerous people and have great power. And then he says, you will not have only one lot. Now, you got to be careful with that, because that doesn't mean he's going to give them more land. What it means is, if they take a look at the land they have two lots. They have land for Ephraim and they have land for Manasseh. And that's very clearly spelled out in Joshua chapter 16 and Joshua chapter 17. And then he says, for the hill country can be yours. Although it's a forest, you can clear it, and its furthest borders will be yours. For you can also drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong. And this is just such good leadership on Joshua's part, that he would simply hold his ground, take a stand, and keep reminding them of what they had. They had the forest land, they could clear it. They had the strength to conquer the Canaanites. And then as we go a little deeper, we find out some of the reason that the people of Ephraim and Manasseh were having trouble. So if we go over to Judges chapter 1, it says, let's see, Judges chapter 1, and in verse 27. And we find out why the children of Joseph were complaining. Why didn't they have enough land in their own eyes? And so in Judges chapter 1, starting in verse 27, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and its towns, nor Tanakh and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and its towns, nor the inhabitants of Iblim and its town, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and its town, but the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. And by the way, I I love that because there's really a battle of wills here. I mean, you could see the Manassites coming and the Canaanites saying, "We're not leaving. We're determined to live here." oh, if you're determined to live there, well, gosh, I'll just have to go somewhere else. A lot of times in our life, problems, they're tough, they're challenging, they don't move easily. And here the Canaanites, they're determined to live there. But what happened to the Manassites? They weren't going to drive out the people. And so because they weren't going to obey God and follow through and trust God that he would give them the land that he promised them, well, then they didn't have enough land. And so they wanted somebody else's land, or they wanted more land. But the problem is very clearly theirs. And then you go down to verse 29 and we have the same problem. Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, but the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. And so you've got the Manassites and the Ephraimites. And why don't they have their land? Because they're not trusting God and not doing the things that God commanded. And so it's a pretty simple teaching, but it was interesting to me to see the two sides of this from, and I'm constantly trying to work on my life, constantly trying to be a better Christian. And one of the things that I'm really working on is the way I approach life, the way I'm thinking about life, being positive, not being negative. Like Thomas's prophecy, being a light to the world, not kind of casting a shadow where I go. And so it was a very interesting lesson to me to see how here the Ephraimites and the people of Manasseh, and they have more than anybody else, and they're going to gripe. And then for Joshua's part, that he took a stand against that. And he handled it with grace. He didn't denigrate them. He just told them they could do what God told them they could do. They could clear the forests. They can conquer the Canaanites. They can have the land that God gave them. So he took a stand. He was firm. He was truthful. He didn't denigrate them. He didn't belittle them in any way. But he didn't allow himself to be pushed around either. And I just thought, wow, this is a really great lesson for me, for you, for us, as we deal in life. So that's what I saw this week that I had not seen before. And I'm blessed to share it with you. I know it's not a super long teaching, but we can talk for a long time if you want to.